Hello, and welcome to Demento's Guide to Otherworld, the helpful guide to help you along your journey on uncertainty through different planes of existence or dimensions. Have you ever found yourself isekai, summoned to another world, or reincarnated? Then this is a helpful book for you. This is the beginning chapter, the chapter of the fantasy set. In this chapter, I will be discussing many of the typical fantasy tropes. Each fantasy then has its own uniquities to diversify it from other ones. But the overall premise is all usually the same, and this is what I've been finding in many of these fantasy medieval settings. So, some, not all, have magical monsters and magic. So, in these types of settings, the chances of you dying are less likely due to the helpful benefits of magic and combating one of the most horrible, deadliest thing in all fantasy settings, diseases. In fantasy settings, there's not a whole lot of basic hygiene. So the true nemesis of all fantasy settings is hygiene and health. Sickness and disease can run rampant and devastate an entire town or village. So make sure you're stocked up plenty on medicine and use basic modern medical knowledge to your advantage. If you're not from a modern medicine world and found yourself in a fantasy world and don't know too much about medicine, then you should be fine because you've already experienced and lived through probably some of the harshness of the diseases that might be spreading rampant. Now, if you're in a magical setting with magical beasts and monsters and stuff, you should only worry about your physical fitness if you do not have a magical aptitude. Another thing to note is you need a physical fitness to survive in a fantasy world if you don't have a magical aptitude. Because there's a lot of heavy labor involved in every activity you do. A lot of it is chopping wood, foraging, killing monsters, and so on and so forth. You got bandits, uh, monsters again, and a bunch of other horrible nastiness, and wars, a lot of wars some of the times. But anyways, but yeah, you need to stay physically fit, aware of your hygiene, and survive. If you have a magical aptitude, its magical systems are varied sometimes. Sometimes you need to absorb the mana, the magical energy that whatever. Sometimes it's like in the air and you have to absorb it and feel it around you. Other times it is in the creatures and plants and vegetations, and you would have to eat magical beasts or plants to regain your mana. Again, it's different in each fantasy setting, but for me, I find it the majority of them is just the magic is in the air, like some sort of atom or particle that exists in that reality. Like electricity, how it's always around us and in abundance, but we don't always feel or sense it until it's like zapping us. Yeah, that is probably the best explanation I can provide for mana energy recovery and stuff. I do have the ability to kind of have spatial awareness and sense the things around me due to my interdimensional manipulation space control. I can, for those of you who do not know, I can bend the space of one location to another, connecting them through a portal. I can also do that too from one reality to another. But as I've traveled along, it's more like I'm hitting a pressure point than actually picking a target. So my interdimensional travels are limited to locations. But that's beside the point. You don't need to know that unless you have interdimensional space teleportation. Then hopefully that little tidbit helps you out. Armor is good to have, but you don't need to overdo it. Mobility is also key. You need to be nimble, fast, and agile, as well as well protected. So I find that stacking up some leather on top of each other, folded into layers, is best because I tend not to get into sword fights, and I mostly get into fights with wild animals, which the heavy leather, thick hide provides against bites and claws. But for bite force, there are some creatures that can break some bones and damage stuff, so be wary of that as well. Anyways, if you ever find yourself in a magical fantasy setting, test the food, use charcoal and sand to filter water, or you can do the long way of boiling, collecting them, and all that stuff. But, anyways, basic hygiene, physical fitness are the paramounts of it. Surviving is a different story. In the next chapter, I'll talk about nobility, factions, and nations, on how to properly navigate social structures, not to be a slave, and how to deal with bandits. I am Dementio, and goodbye.